I just want to start by saying good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for the panel titled "The Movement Needs." The movement needs co-conspirators instead of allies. I want to start by giving some brief introductions. We have some phenomenal panelists that I'm really excited to hear and learn from, and I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to bring them on our campus as panelists in this discussion. So we have Audrina, Beto, Dawn, and Gabby. I just want to start off by introducing Audrina. Audrina is a program director for anti-racism, social justice work. Her work includes identifying policy and practice changes, developing and facilitating anti-racism workshops, organizing biennial equity conferences, and hosting a podcast called Radio Free CSU. She is fortunate to have found a profession and social activism that aligns with her values and belief that education is a human right and Black Lives Matter. She's also the co-founder organizer of the Long Beach chapter of Black Lives Matter. And she has also formally worked as coordinating a campaign with political staff with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Thank you so much, Audrina, for being here. Okay. Beto Lopez currently serves as the project director for the Long Beach Residents Empowered. In the last few years, he's gained local and national organizing experience in immigration, education, labor, and tenants' rights advocacy. So before joining Long Beach Residents Empowered, he was a community organizer with the Greater Long Beach Interfaith Community Organization and has been actively organizing in Long Beach since 2015 with a variety of local organizations and campaigns. Beto also serves as the current president of Latinos in Action and another local organization in Long Beach. Thank you so much, Beto, for being here. Dawn Mawkins is a Long Beach native, a mom of Black sons, and a business owner. She is a longtime union, political, faith-based, and community organizer. She was instrumental in the formation of the Black Lives Matter Global Network as its first national organizing director and co-founded the Long Beach chapter of Black Lives Matter. Shortly after co-founding the Long Beach chapter of Black Lives Matter, Dawn committed herself and her organizing strengths to her local communities of Long Beach. She is an alliance, coalition, community builder, centering her work in Black community and around those most impacted by institutional and systemic violence. Thank you so much, Dawn, for being here. Okay. And Gabby Hernandez is an undocumented scholar and community organizer. She is currently the executive director for the Long Beach Immigrants' Rights Coalition. Her experience as an undocumented woman has fueled her commitment and passion for social justice and immigrant rights. She believes in the importance of people power and grassroots organizing, Gabby recently completed her master's degree in applied anthropology here at California State University, Long Beach. Congratulations, Gabby, and thank you so much for being here. So I want to start having or framing the conversations because we're going to be talking about allyship and co-conspiratorship. So I want to start off with some broad definitions about allyship. And allyship has been defined as, or an ally is being considered someone who makes the commitment and effort to recognize their privilege, whether it's based on gender, race, class, race, or sexual identity, and works in solidarity with oppressed groups in the struggle for justice. Alicia Garza defines co-conspirators as people who are actively fighting against the system of white supremacy, and in particular, the benefits that they receive from it. So my first question that I want to posed to the panelists, at first glance, these definitions of allies or being an ally or a co-conspirator are defined very similarly. What is the difference? And maybe I'll ask Audrina to go first because I just read an article in which you talked about this in a local newspaper. So maybe if you can help frame that discussion, and then we'll go to our other panelists.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. So I think allyship is it's the easier part, right? It's the reading, it's the knowing, it's the understanding, it's the I sympathize with you. It's the maybe sharing an article on Facebook. It's maybe reposting something on Twitter. It's maybe showing up to an event on occasion, something you saw on Instagram or a friend took you to and you had a better time than you anticipated that you would. A co-conspirator, on the other hand, is someone who finds an organization like Black Lives Matter, for example, and gets in and says, how can I help? What do you need me to do? And not just what you need me to do for this organization, but what do you need me to do on a systemic level? Because let's remember that Black Lives Matter is about ending systemic violence, is about ending police brutality, which goes hand in hand with systemic violence so far as Black folk and brown folk in this country are concerned. So it means really digging in to the systems and the structures and addressing those issues. So, for example, it could mean for folks, it could mean when there's an action, I ask you, how can I be of service? And let me give an example, because this is when it really, I'd seen it before, but it really struck me. Stephon Clark, who was murdered by the Sacramento Police Department in March of 2018. The folks there were organizing, and there was a scene, I never forget seeing it. His brother, they were addressing the city council, and his brother, who was very upset by it because it was brutal and unnecessary, his murder, Stephon Clark's murder, jumped up on a table and started yelling at the council members. And that's what family members do. There's someone they know has been taken from them and will never be returned or never come home again. And when he jumped up on that table, as you can imagine, swarms of police ran to the table to try and move him. And what happened was a bevy of white folks who were there in support of the organizers and in support of him quickly jumped up and surrounded that table and surrounded him to make sure that he was not going to be harmed by those police. Not only did they make sure that he finished what he had to say to city council, because it is their responsibility to hear what the public has to say to them, but they then made sure that he got out of the courtroom because they surrounded him and helped to get him out. That is what we mean by co-conspiratorship in action. You are putting your body somewhere. You're not coming to me afterward and saying, oh, that's so terrible what happened to you, or I wish they had just let you finish what you had to say. That's the difference, because an ally would do that. A co-conspirator says, I'm going to make sure you finish what you have to say and you finish what you have to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone else like to chime in on that question?
I'm happy to. Good morning, Amber. Good morning, everyone on the panel and those who are with us listening in. Yeah, excited to have this conversation, particularly on the heels of co-conspirator work and in coalition with co-conspirators around the, our current iteration of Black freedom struggle, the current heightened campaigns around defunding the police globally, nationally, and particularly here in Long Beach, at the same time that our city budget was underway. And so calling for that defund in coalition with our allies. And some are allies, some are co-conspirators, right? Thank you, Audrina, for kind of pointing out that there is a difference around our people's budget right here in Long Beach. So I'm excited to be here, coming off of the heels of being in co-conspiratorship and allyship with folks around this work, particularly with two other panelists here, Beto and Gabby, specifically, and others. But I think I want to share another example as well. And Beto, I'm gonna look to you, my brother, because Beto and I met at Cal State Long Beach. Gosh, how long ago now? 10 years ago, something, 5? Oh, not even, something like that. It's over 5. Okay, somewhere in there. And we met after there was a student, a Black female student in a class, and I think it might have been a sexuality, gender class course. And a male white student pulled a knife on this young girl in class. I don't remember if he cut her or how close it was that he got to her, but he pulled a knife on her. And it was a traumatic incident. And the faculty person at the time was attempting to handle it, and folks were trying to tend to the support of the student. I remember her name just now, I won't say her name, but, and the, folks were calling for discipline for the student who pulled a knife on her. Like, how is it okay that about a week later or less than a week later, he was coming back to class? And folks were like, what is going on? How is it that this dude is okay to be in class after pulling a knife out on a student and this white, this Black woman? He had used racial slurs. He was being derogatory. He was acting like a racist in front of everyone. And so instead of folks saying, oh, what a shame, as Audrina just pointed out, oh, what a shame, he really shouldn't say those things. He really shouldn't be back. Somebody should do something about it. What ended up happening is co-conspirators come into action. And immediately, like, folks began to organize around the administration that had refused to hold this student accountable. And there were some folks who were saying, oh, that's just really sad and unfortunate. And, we're an ally and I support you. And no, it's like, it's more than the verbal commit or the apathy right? It's action. It's action, and literally, how are you leveraging your privilege? How are you leveraging your access, your resources, your into whatever spaces those are, as other people of color, as non-Black people, white people, whoever else, right? And so that's what other folks did for this young Black student in response to a racist act against her, in holding the university accountable. This school system who had refused to, we learned later why they refused. It turned out the boy was the son of a campus police officer. How about that? And so no wonder the university didn't want to hold this guy accountable. So it actually took a lot for students to actually put their bodies on the line in support of this student. So Beto and I met that way, and ever since then, our relationship has been that. But that's just another example of being a co-conspirator and leveraging your privilege and power and access and resources to defend Black lives, to support Black lives, to empower Black lives. So yeah, there you go, another example.
Yeah, thank you all for being here and for inviting me. And I just wanted to follow up with what Don was saying. I think it's putting your body on the line, right? I think especially as like non-Black folks, like this is the moment to do that and to take action, and not simply say post on social media, right? Because anyone can do that. I think it's about how can you show up and how can you use your privilege, even as Latinx folks that are also experiencing a lot of systemic oppression. We still have a lot of privilege, and I think we need to like be able to use that, even if it means having conversations, right? Like having those uncomfortable conversations with their families, in our workplaces, in our classrooms, you know, wherever it is, I think that's where you show up. Like, and I can just be like, yo, yeah, I agree. You know, we shouldn't do that. Or let me just write this letter or submit this letter. Yes, there's one portion of it, but it's also like putting yourself out there. Cause I think we always put the burden on the people that are experiencing the most harm. And I think it's for us to kind of take a step in, right? And say, no, we can actually take that on and take that and communicate that and have those conversations. And it's simple as that, right? But it's also as like putting your body, literal body, on the line. And I can talk about like the immigration perspective of this, right? We have a lot of Black immigrants in detention, and a lot of people are talking about it's horrific that there's people in detention. It's horrific that there's children in detention, but yet a co-conspirator will stop a bus, will get on the line and stop a bus from having a person be deported. That's the difference, right? To me, when I look at it, is sure you can post about it, sure you can like even write an article about it, right? Like you can do that, but can you show up with your body and stop a bus from having someone deported? To me, that's what it would be showing up, right? And to stopping someone from really being completely torn apart from their families. And this happens a lot in Black and brown families, right? The family separation happens like daily. So I think the difference, I think people get confused, but the difference is very, very distinct. Like if you are gonna be a co-conspirator, you're gonna put your body on the line. If you're gonna be an ally, you can talk about it. But I think it's also, this is important to have this conversation so that folks kind of realize, okay, that's the difference. An ally is a person that that is thinking about their privilege, but I don't know if they're necessarily using it within the scope of it, right? And with all of its power that it has. So I think it's a good conversation to have, a reflection for all of us, right? And even think about like, what is allyship, right? What is allyship to me, and how am I willing to show up for people? Because it's also, it's gonna be your body on the line, but you're gonna be consequences, right? And you have to kind of do that reflection. So I'm grateful that we're having this conversation.
Just to add my 2 cents, right? I think that, first of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. Proud CSULB alumni. I could say that because, during my time there, like Don mentioned, we worked and we pushed and we fought. And we pushed the administration at Cal State Long Beach to its limits. We shut down the offices a couple of times. And like we've been saying, right, showing up means putting your body on the line. And, I'm also undocumented. And so for us who have this status of undocumented, we run a bigger risk. But yet we still do this work because we know how important it is to show up for our family. At the end of the day, that's what it is. Because, if you're not willing to show up, and just be an ally and watch things from the sidelines, are you really going to be there when we need you? Be a part of it, right? Grow into this movement. It isn't easy, that's for sure. A lot of people will say, you know what, I don't want to do this. My family doesn't support this. My friends don't support this. What do you support? What do you stand for? That's the bigger question. And so when we talk about, being an ally, yeah, you can do it, right? It's cool. Maybe you'll just do it during the moment because it's what's happening, it's what's trending. But realize that this is something bigger, that this is something that's been going on for years and even ages. It's been since the beginning of this country, right? That they've been seeing the Black community as slaves, as byproducts. Like they don't even care about them. So we got to look out for each other if we're really going to change things. And that's why the co-conspirators is a very important conversation to have. And I'm actually really happy to be a part of this because, like Gabby said, it's a reflection of where we've been and where we have to go. And so I'm really hoping that folks who are on this meeting or the session are really going to take this back and look at their own life and say, who do I want to be? Do I want to be an ally or do I want to be a co-conspirator? Especially for the students. This is your opportunity to learn, and not only learn in the classroom, but learn as a student and grow with others. Honestly, the best, teachings I got at Cal State were, working with other people, learning from others, learning from their experiences, and also some faculty that were willing to step up and teach us. Some faculty members that were willing to organize with us. We had 4-hour-long meetings when we were out there organizing on campus. And so be a co-conspirator, not an ally. Yeah, allyship is important, right? But we need more people on the front lines, to be honest with y'all. Like, it's getting more difficult day by day. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much for all of your responses. I do want to pose another question. Um, it has been said that the term ally has been corrupted by what we call performative allyship. Can you explain what performative allyship is and the impact this has on movement building? And maybe can you provide some concrete examples of that? Beto, I saw you shaking your head, so maybe you can move forward with that question.
It goes back right to the point of showing up, right? Are you just gonna be the person that posts on social media, the one who's just scared to show up, right? Come out, experience it for the first time. To be honest, you're gonna grow so much as an individual and as a person when you do show up for your first action. It's that moment of empowerment. Um, like I said, you can stay on the sidelines, but you won't gain much. Then you have to self-reflect and say, what am I doing? Am I really helping? Um, by you sharing something, are you just showing it up because you don't want to be considered a racist? Is that the reason why you're sharing it? Or do you really mean what you're sharing? And if you really mean what you're sharing, you're going to show up. Because at the end of the day, when we're out there in the front lines, when we're out there, by the front lines, I mean, we're out there blocking the streets, we're out there causing ruckus, we're out there shutting down meetings. Like, we need more people there. Adrina gave a good example, right? We need more people who have more privilege than us to surround us when the cops come after us or when immigration comes after us. Because at the end of the day, if you don't show up, who's going to show up for us? Imagine if all we had were, for example, let's say we had black activists and brown activists, Latino activists, just all together and the cops came for us. They're going to come at us with a much brutal force than if we had more white folks out there, willing to put their bodies on the line to protect us. When we're the ones out there shouting and putting our lives on the line every single day. Just yesterday, we took down an intersection, right? And what did we have? When we looked at the security and who was serving as security, we had predominantly white folks working as security. Why? Because they have an orange vest that makes them shine a little bit more. That way, when cops come, they're the first to react to that call. When cars are trying to come at people, they're the first ones to get in front of the car. We had one brother, Miles, who literally put himself on his knees in front of a car and said, "You're not coming through," right? To protect everybody else that was in the middle. And so that's what I'm talking about. Don't be a performative ally, just sharing stuff like that doesn't really help. We need you to come out. Even if you just show up, just show up. It makes such a big difference to see more people showing up.
Yeah, I think I wanted to give the example of not that long ago on social media, specifically Instagram, people started sharing a black screen. And I think they put out Blackout Tuesday. I think that was the hashtag. People did, like everyone did that. Like people that had not commented anything when the uprisings were starting to happen. They had not commented anything, but then everyone posted that black box, right? Because it was easy, like Beto was saying, it's easy to just repost that, right? With no specific message, no call to action, just simply showing that by you sharing that black box, you are an ally, right? And that you are with the Black community. That didn't really, like, people just did it because others were doing it. They didn't get to do that reflection and ask themselves those critical questions as, like, why am I doing this? What is this? What is going to be the impact of this, right? And when you look at it, we start hearing that was actually kind of defeating the purpose, and it was actually doing a lot of harm from like what was actually happening. Instead of putting a black box, you should have like uplifted an action, right? Uplifted a call to action, something that was happening. No, yet people just put a box because it's easy to do that. It's safer to do that, to just put a box and say, yes, look at me. Everyone can see that I'm an ally. But that's not real, right? That's just performative. That's the exact example of being a performative ally. A lot of people did it without knowing the background about it, without knowing the intention, without knowing where that was gonna go. So I think that's kind of one specific example of how much, and it went viral. Like millions of people did that, right? So I think that's one of the like prime examples of what a performative ally is. And then you have other folks on the other line that are like, no, you know, that's not it. Like, what is the call to action? What are we doing about this? How are we going to show up? Like, how can we do something? Not just posting on social media, because that's easy. Anyone can do it, right? But how can you show up? And again, it's going to be like, not just posting a black box, but having those very uncomfortable conversations that people are not willing to have, that people are like scared of having, because they are uncomfortable, you know, because we know there's a lot of people that are like embody anti-blackness, right? Because it's so hard to fight that, right? It's so hard to unlearn that. And that's something that we have to unlearn every single day, because it's kind of ingrained in our brains, right? Like, since we're very, very young. So I think he's gonna have to do a lot of like inward looking, right? And thinking about like, what is this black box posting gonna do? Like, how is this gonna benefit the movement? And if it's not gonna, if you can't answer that question, then don't do it, because then that's just not gonna benefit anyone. Instead of like get involved locally, or figure out how you can get involved, you know, in local actions that are happening now that could actually make an impact in your area, right? So I think I would just say that. And I think people can relate to that example, because I think even people that are watching this probably posted that black box, right? So I think maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it, but I think it's time for you to be critical when you're posting anything. Like, think about like, what is this doing? Like, how is this benefiting? Like, how am I, you know, contributing to the movement?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll follow.
Adrena's giving you the floor, Don.
Okay. Am I on mute? No, I'm good. Okay. Yeah, some of what I'm hearing is about I want to say it's funny, my son is in his classroom, and I think they have them making some loud sounds, and I keep thinking he's talking to me, but he's not. So if you hear him, just ignore my background. And it's weird for him to be making loud sounds. Anyway, so I want to think about, you know, being bold, being courageous. We're kind of talking about taking risks, right? And speaking of my son, he's like almost 6'3". He's 13 years old. And we know that like state violence, for example, and all other kind of statistics, but specifically state violence impacts Black communities disproportionately per population than other groups, right? And so it's a risk to be like walking down the street past a group of police cars, right? For young Black people. And we, you know, I feel like I read something or saw something about we can't undo that risk. We can't take that skin off and be like, well, today I'm gonna, you know, I want to feel safer, so I'm going to remove this Black skin, something to that effect. I feel like I've heard or read something like that. But we can't remove the risk. We can't escape the risks of state violence, that disproportionate state violence on Blackness. And so I'm saying that to say that for co-conspirators, that performative piece is when you take some level of risk, is it performative? Is it so that you can say you're an ally? Is it so that you can say that you did something? Is it so that you can show it, you know, an image of I came out and had my sign on, or I spoke at this thing and said I support my Black community, that I support anti-Black policies, or you know, that I support certain things. Where I'm going with it is this, organizationally, two things. One is there's a union that says they support Black lives, and they support disrupting police violence. This particular union, they don't necessarily have an issue with police directly necessarily, but they say that they are absolutely against police violence and excessive force and shooting unarmed people and killing people, right? They say that they are against that. And so they call themselves an ally because they're against those things and the harm against Black people. And so, and this union, and so they say we're an ally, and so we're gonna do some things and support, right? We're gonna, you know, provide water at the action. We're gonna provide a bus if people need to get from point A to point B. We're gonna do these things to support in some ways, right? Maybe we'll write a letter on behalf of something, right? But this union also has a relationship with law enforcement. And so for a group that would call themselves an ally so that they can say that they're in support of both Black lives and anti-police violence, you know, I think that their allyship has been performative, right? In-kind contributions are not necessarily moving the needle, right? It's not disrupting the systemic harm. The systemic harm lies within the policing system. And so what are you doing to take the risk to disrupt this violence that you say you stand against within the system that you happen to have a relationship with, right? So unless you're doing that, leveraging that privilege, challenging the relationship that you have with them directly, taking a risk in doing so, putting their organizational bodies on the line, then just providing water or a bus, frankly, is a little bit performative, right? So I want to offer up that organizational example, right? One other one is we have a lot of, here in Long Beach, we have a lot of elected officials. I'm going to read something. In fact, I'll pull it up for you. I think I can share screen. I'm also getting over a cold, so I'm over here rubbing my nose and sniffling a little bit, so excuse that. I'm going to share screen. And I hope that everyone can see this. Let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. So if you can read this, our mayor, Robert Garcia, who is in line to take up other political positions in the state right now. And he wrote on his social media this beautiful flowery comment about protest, strikes, boycotts, marches. This is not a moment, but a movement for Black lives. Over the last few months, I've done an enormous amount of listening from Black friends, organizers, teachers, activists, youth, and clergy. The conversations have been hard but uplifting. To all those that have spent time with me, including Black Lives Matter Long Beach, thank you. From healthcare to law enforcement to education, we have failed our Black community, but we can all work to recognize the systemic racism that exists in our institutions, to do everything we can to right these injustices. We can't fix these deep and serious challenges in just 1 year with a presidential election or in a school year or in a budget cycle. We must all be ready to do the hard and sustained work that lies ahead, but I'm hopeful and believe deeply that we are going to build a better and more just country. So I'm sharing this to say, I'm gonna stop sharing now while I'm sharing it. I'm gonna stop sharing it. I'm sharing this to say that looks great, right? And, you know, in some conversations, some of our elected officials have called themselves allies. Several have. But unless the mayor is ready to put those words, to translate those words into shifting power from a harmful system, policing system, into the hands of the people, then he should never call himself an ally. He should be mindful about making flowery statements that are not helpful if he's not able to be a co-conspirator, right? And just on the note about decision makers, again, with saying that folks are in allyship with Black lives and the police violence pieces, last September, we don't necessarily support candidates. We're in election season, right? We don't necessarily promote, support, right? We're about issues. What issues are most impacting our vulnerable communities? Where do candidates stand on those issues, right? But one time, the end of last year, someone became more of a co-conspirator when they refused to accept a local policy around blocking transparency around violent police records. And that was one of our council people. And it wasn't until then that we realized, wow, like this elected official is actually a co-conspirator. And it was at that moment that we learned that it's worth being in tighter relationship with those who do that work. And so that was a long example, I think, on this question, but there you go.
I did want to add something because I think it's relevant to what you're saying, Don. I think when the uprisings happened, a lot of organizations, a lot of schools, a lot of cities came up with statements about how much they supported the BLM movement, or how they were, they were really concerned about the, white supremacy in this country. And I think a lot of people wrote really nice statements, including universities. But what really came out of that? Like what policies were changed? How did they help, Black folks, be part of the college, university life? Like what policies were changed within organizations that put out a statement? Who works there? What does their board look like? Questions to ask, not just simply putting out a statement. It's for you all that are watching, your as students, that statement that university put out, the president, what does that mean? What's substantial about it? Like, what are the actions that have been followed up after that statement? There's a lot that could happen, but what exactly happened, right? So I think that's what we're talking about, the performative aspect. I think you can put a really nice written statement out, and then you're like, when you read it, you're like, yes, this person they get it, like they're gonna make some change. But then when no actions follow up, that statement is meaningless. Whether it is a president at a university, whether it's a director or executive director at an organization, whether it is, a principal at an elementary school, like these are things that we have to think about. What does that mean that you're putting out this statement? How are you backing it up with actions? And I think for us is to hold those people accountable, right? Like, you wrote this statement, so nice, but what are you doing? Like, what are the steps? Can you show me, like, have a list of what are you going to do to actually implement that, to stop that? Because it's all around us, right? Like white supremacy and what we're dealing with, it's all around us. What are you doing to fight it? I think it's for us to have those critical questions in mind as we see the statements being put out.
Yeah, this is Audrina. I'm going to apologize. I am having some internet instability issues in my neighborhood today. So I hope I can be heard. Looks like I can be, yeah. So thank you, Beto, Don, and Gabby. Y'all here really well. I think I want to add just a few more points. I don't know if folk have heard a term. You see it often on social media postings that, you like Black culture, you like Black music, you like Black dance, you like Black athletes, you might even admire some Black athletes, you like Black actors, and let's be clear that all of those things make a ton of money for folk in America, and not necessarily are Black folks the beneficiaries of that. But those things are superficial, because what they should come with is making sure that Black kids have a decent education, to make sure that Black mothers who in Long Beach are the most housing impacted folk, to make sure that Black children have infant care programs, since we know that the mortality rate is high among both Black mothers and Black infants. That's when you are doing something other than performative allyship. The Black Panthers in their day started school lunch and school breakfast programs, all right? And then the federal government picked that up And those folks who started those initial programs, I would call them co-conspirators, because that was unheard of before. I would say that the sickle cell anemia program that the Black Panthers started, and the research that began after the Black Panthers started their healthcare clinics, and the free healthcare clinics that I grew up with on the South Side of Chicago, that was in many ways co-conspiratorship. But then those things get corrupted, right? And the funding goes away for those things. And so the genuine co-conspiratorship comes in when the cameras are gone, when the limelight is over, when the news is not talking about it, when nobody else is posting about it, but you know the issue still persists and you are still engaged in doing the fight, right? Because if we watch the news for what is, if we watch the news or listen to shock jock radio or anything like that, we are completely lost about what is truly happening with our communities and the resource that folks need. Now, in the case of the university, in this case, the Cal State University system, which is the largest public education system in the United States of America with 23 campuses, we have a problem with Black student enrollment. We have a problem with Black student retention. Now, the university puts out tons of wonderful statements, as do lots of organizations and businesses across the country. They all say stuff, but the proof, and the proof in the pudding, as my mother used to say, the proof is in the action, and the numbers don't lie. When you look at Black student enrollment in the Cal State, something more needs to be done for at the university. It has truly gone down, along with the resources. Quite frankly, as the university student population has gotten darker, the funding for the university has gotten a lot lighter. So there's work to be done there. In the broader community, I see some comments from folks in the Q&A. You folks have asked questions about, can police be allies or co-conspirators? In my opinion, the answer is no. When you are hired and trained and the culture is to over-police and violate the lives of Black folk and brown folk, then no, you cannot be an ally. You can be an individual who tends to be an ally, but you are part of a structure. And those are the things we have to overturn, which are the structures of oppression. So in this case, I might be talking about systemic racism, or in the case of the university, institutional racism, where the words are there, but the actions are not there. And the actions have to be there, not necessarily in, I've written a great report, I've done some great research, and so now I'm done. I've done my part to expose it. No, the work is ongoing. We in organizing like to say this is a journey. It's not a race. Structural racism, institutional racism didn't happen overnight. It began for Black folk in this country in August of 1619, when we were brought here first as enslaved peoples. One could argue that it began in 1492, when the Pilgrims landed and began to massacre our native folk. That it is institutional. It is steeped in this country. And one way I think to overcome that for folks so that we don't even have to be saying allyship or performative allyship, is for us to understand and be honest about the history of this country. Be honest about the white supremacy that's baked into every fabric of this. And that doesn't mean for folks to go around and be shamed, or for folks to say, well, now I'm invisible. It means to say, my ancestors were responsible for these actions, and that has led to where we are today. And I do not want my generations to go forward in this way. I want us all to be interconnected and intersectional with each other, because the truth is we are interconnected and intersectional with each other, but we are very unhealthy right now, because there's a large segment of the American population, mostly white folks, because that is the majority population, who are in denial, in absolute denial about the truth of this country. So when you acknowledge those things, and we teach that in our school system, then the things that we might point out as systemic and institutional racism, or the things that we might point out as the difference between being an ally or a co-conspirator or engaging in performative allyship, won't be a topic, because we are connected and we understand our histories. We need to do real reconciliation throughout our country, which is for those who have done harm to acknowledge the harm that they have committed, to apologize for the harm that they have committed, and then make the long-term plans and the long-term commitment to move forward to remedy those harms.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I know Don said that was a really long answer, but it was thorough. And I think all of your answers together really helped us to really understand the difference between acting and doing, right? There's a big difference between showing up with the lights on, acting like what people may say, like you're about that life, but you're really not, right? So the next question that I want to pose, there have been, as you may see as panelists, there are a lot of questions that are being entered by our audience. So the first question that I want to ask from the audience is, so these questions center on co-conspiratorship in the midst of COVID-19. How can you be a co-conspirator? How can you, I guess what I'm saying is there's fear around showing up and putting themselves and others at risk by showing up. So I think there is a desire to be a co-conspirator, but how do you be a co-conspirator in the midst of COVID-19?
Wear your mask. I'm kidding. Go ahead, Beto. I saw you queuing up. Go ahead.
No, Gabby, you want to go first?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think all those questions are like, you all have to do that reflection. Like, how do you want to show up? Because the reality is that people are at risk, especially the most, marginalized communities are at risk. We know that essential workers, right, are those folks that are out there risking their lives to serve other people. Like, so those people are already at risk, right? So you have to do the reflection of like, how do I want to show up, right? And that's it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation to have with yourself, but you need to have it, because the reality is that anyone can be a co-conspirator, anyone, if you're willing to put the risk out there, right? If you're really having that critical consciousness to be there and show up and not do it for you, but because you know that you're part of a larger movement. That's just one. But then also, a lot of what is needed is it's financial resources, right? Like, how can we, doing this work requires a lot of financial resources that are not there, right? So if you don't think you can be out there and show up and be on the front lines, that's okay. Maybe you can donate $10, $15, $25 to BLM, to folks that are doing like this work, right? So but you have to do that reflection, right? And be real and honest with yourself. Like, you know what? I want to be there, but I know that I can't. How can I do something? Maybe it's providing those financial resources, right? Maybe it's having those uncomfortable conversations with your family. But I think when people ask me that question, I put it back on them. Like, you need to kind of reflect, like, how do you want to show up? Like, what does this look like for you? And have that conversation, because I can tell you, and this has happened a lot, right? People always ask, like, how can I show up? And you give them a list of things and they're like, well, how do I even get started? Right? And it's like, well, it's because it's not just a one-time thing. You have to be part of this. It's like daily. You have to be in this to be able to do it. So it's going to require a lot of sacrifice. Are you willing to do that too? Right? So I think what I would say is do that reflection on, like, within yourself, and ask yourself, how do I want to show up? Like, in what real way? Because it's not just like showing up to one action. It's not showing up to two actions. Like, this is our livelihoods. I mean, I think I can say that for like myself, Beto, and Don. Like, this is and Adriana. Like, this is our livelihoods. This is what we do. How much are you willing to sacrifice to be part of it, right?
showing up, right, in the during a pandemic, in the middle of a pandemic. So, aside from the uprisings, aside from the BLM actions, there's been a ton of actions happening all over, all over the U.S. The media tends to do a really good job in portraying, our actions as COVID epicenters, right? But they don't focus on white rallies. They don't focus on Trump rallies, in the spread of COVID. So I also want to say, the way that we've been doing it and the way that we've been showing up is wearing our mask, right? If you don't feel comfortable being around other people, it's fine. Keep your distance. It even helps the crowd look bigger, to be honest, if you spread out. Um, so if you feel comfortable in showing up and just coming out, please do so. Just come check it out, right? Take your distance, bring your mask, bring your hand sanitizer, bring your gloves. I've seen people who are at the vulnerable age, right? Around, I think one of our board members is 75, and she's out there. But of course, taking every precaution necessary, right? Wearing her mask, keeping her distance. I've seen other older folks showing up as well, and same thing, right? Every time we go to an action, is like we ensure that everybody has a mask on, to ensure that we don't spread COVID if we do have COVID, and also ensuring that you get tested right after. That's what we've all been doing. We go to an action and it's like, all right, have you gotten tested, or how are you feeling? Are you feeling the symptoms? Um, but I think what Gabby mentioned is also very important in the sense is, how do you want to show up? What does showing up mean to you? To us, it means something completely different. Your own life experiences will also engage you in that conversation and self-reflection on how do you feel like what showing up means. And so, just take it easy, right? Like, don't think that because we're having this conversation here today, from today to tomorrow, you're gonna be out there. It's gonna take time. No, none of us, landed in this position because we wanted to. We had to. Yeah, our lives are at risk every single day, just by the color of our skin, by our status, who we are, where we live. Our economic status as well plays a big role. If we didn't even have the opportunity to get an education, that would have played a whole different other risk. Due to the fact that we got an education, we quote unquote have a better understanding of how the system works, and even then, we're still targeted. But showing up can come in a variety of ways. I think you have to find a way that you can show up. It can be doing, data research. It can be showing up at an action. It can be, you know, um, making banners. It can show up. There's a variety of ways that you can show up. That doesn't really mean you have to show up to that action if you don't feel comfortable. So I just want to say, find your way, find your path, take your time, but just mean what you do. I think that's what's the biggest message here is mean what you do. Don't just do it to say I've done my part and that's it, and then check out. No, 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 no. This is a lifelong journey, and this is a lifelong commitment if you're really going to help change what has been done in the past.
Yeah, if I can, I don't want folks, I'm looking at this sort of the Q&A, and I don't want folks to feel like there's some shade on the levels of how you can show up, right? We want you to show up however you can show up. All of it is important. I think that what's key about this conversation is we're talking about the penultimate, right? So it's like you can't, I am a Black person in America. I have a particular history and a particular experience, and people who look like me have a particular history and experience and interaction with the police department. And I would say that the overwhelming majority of Black folk don't have a super high opinion of police or interaction with police, or have a fear of police. And how could that not be when the origin of the police is in slave patrols in this country? So that makes sense. But, again, we don't want folks, I don't want folks to leave here thinking, oh, well, then I should just do nothing because I'm not a co-conspirator. That's not at all what's being said here. We in Black Lives Matter believe that we need everybody, and we need everybody to show up and show up how you can show up. So do what you do what you're comfortable doing. But what we want you to do is to graduate to the different levels as you start. So yeah, come on out and be in the street. Yes, make those social media posts. Yes, talk to your friends and family, but also educate yourself, learn more, practice cultural humility, which is asking questions. Don't do the white supremacist thing, which is assuming that your history, your reality is really the truth, because we have multiple truths here, because we have multiple experiences, both as individuals, as communities, and as people in our various races, sexual orientation, sexual identities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to acknowledge that we are different. We have to acknowledge our collective humanity. We have to do the work of really understanding each other, really digging in and reflecting, what's my part in this? What's my people's history in this? How is my life and my experience benefiting me differently from these folks who feel the need and are being called constantly because of the things that are happening in society to hit the streets, to block the streets, to block the freeway, to show up and act out as city council. Ask yourself, why do folks feel the need to do that? And then go do the homework to understand why that's happening. Ask questions along the way, and then build yourself from an ally to a co-conspirator in the movement. Because you got to understand, I, as a person of color, had to work my own way through my processing and understanding of it, because I grew up in respectability politics. I grew up in believing that all you had to do was show up and vote and maybe attend a local community event every now and again, and I was doing something. And that is not enough. We have to be doing the work of holding our politicians accountable, but also holding ourselves accountable. So we want I want folks to leave here knowing, do what you do. We need you. Be an ally, but do the work to become a co-conspirator, because only then will we have the fuel that we need and the understanding that we need to overturn this white supremacist soup that we live in, that has us repeating the same cycle every so many years. And because of social media, quite frankly, to me, it feels like I almost hesitate to turn it on, because every day I see somebody in a Black body being murdered by various police departments around this country. So that says to me that there is a culture in policing, which is a clear function of white supremacy, which is deadly to my body, And we need, and people who look like me, Black Lives Matter, Libre, LBIRC, all of us need folks who are willing to do the work at the levels that they are, but graduate to where you can say, it's not my experience, but I understand how your humanity is completely connected to mine.
I see.
Thank you. Wow, I can't believe it's already been an hour. We've been talking about some stuff. So my next question, and I laugh because I mean, it's not funny, but I think about where we are today. And would we even be here? And I'm sorry, I get a little emotional about it, but would we not be here if George Floyd's murder was not televised for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? And I know that that's not the first Black person to lose their life at the hands of a police officer, but that moment, I don't know, I don't want to get too emotional about it, but that moment really elevated conversations around anti-Blackness and ways that people can demonstrate like Black Lives Matter. However, anti-Blackness can impede, whether you want to say allyship or and or co-conspiratorship. I'm wondering, could you talk more about anti-Blackness, allyship, and co-conspiratorship? Don, I see you queued up.
I'm sorry, Amber, can you repeat that last part for me once more?
I said, could you talk more about anti-Blackness, allyship, and co-conspiratorship? Anyone? I don't mean to, I thought you were unmuting yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to respond. Sorry, I'm enjoying reading some of these comments. I'm seeing the comments, I'm seeing questions. I'm answering some of your questions. Keep them coming. Some sound a little bit provocateur-ish, but that's cool, do you. But I love the legit questions, and I'm gonna continue to try to type some answers. And you know, when we get to that open Q&A part, I don't mind answering some of these. Like, so let me answer your question first. Yeah, anti-Blackness. How? And co-conspiratorship around anti-Blackness.
I was more so asking questions related to like, how can it impede or what? Yeah, so if you could talk about that, I don't know if I
Yeah, it's cool. If I may, so, you know, these are folks who we've been working with in the community. And Gabby, I want to like lean towards you a little bit, because Gabby and I have had these conversations around anti-Blackness, right? There's racism, and like the way that, using the city of Long Beach, for example, the way that it responded to these current uprisings is by just trying to, well, not just, I think our systems, our political systems, our policing systems, our capitalist systems would love to make this just about race, but we know that it's specifically about state violence and state control, and you know, the desire to keep society in a police and surveillance state, right? And so they would love to just keep the narrative about race, right? And that works for a lot of people because it's fear-based. And you tap into people's fears, and then therein lies one way to try to control masses, if you will. I don't study this stuff. I just know from experience. I see it, I live it, right? And so racism is one thing, right, that is grounded in white supremacy, but there's anti-Blackness. And that shows up in so many different ways. It is global. Hearing my kid again. And it's global, and not just, you know, based here in the US. It's like the darker, the lighter the skin, the closest proximity to our visual idea of whiteness, then the softer the relationship or greater access. Or, you know, there's these conversations about, a lot of conversations and studies about that complexion of Blackness, I guess. And often most darker skin are often most marginalized when I think about in other parts of the world, as well as here in the US. But, and a lot of that, I think, comes from how the state draws the narrative around Black people, the dehumanization of whoever they want to make the target at the time, whether it's immigrants, whether it's poor people, whether it's homeless people, criminalizing homeless people, criminalizing Black people, right? We see the headlines after police apprehend people or kill people. The headlines for the Black person who they killed or apprehended is about some criminal act or some non-human labeled identity about them, right? But when it's Dylan Roof, or when it's the kid who killed 2 people with the gun walking down the street in Kenosha, the headline was very different, right? So you just dehumanize people. So that happens globally, and that happens socially. And so other identity groups see that. And if you don't have an experience with that group that the system or the state or capitalism or whoever is trying to dehumanize, then you may start to take that in and believe that yourself, right? And therefore becoming, you know, having this anti-Black thought or you know, thought or mind, you know, anti-Black thought. And so Gabby and I were talking about this, and we had to like open up some conversations, about how, you know, for non-Black communities in particular, to have those conversations within their families. And so I started this by saying I wanted to lean towards Gabby because she was brilliant in talking about how that shows up like in the Latinx community. We know in other communities, but I'll just speak to Latinx since we've had those conversations. I would love to pass it to you, Gabby, if you want to share. How those.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think I want to say that colorism is real and it aids anti-Blackness, right? Like, and it's simple. And I think I'm going to say this to kind of relate to folks that I know it happened in my household, right? Which if one of my cousins had a baby and the baby was on the lighter side, the baby was beautiful, right? And that's what they said. If the baby was born and the baby was on a little bit darker or just darker, then the baby wasn't as cute. You know, the baby could have been lighter. Those comments are part of this color, you know, the colorism that exists in our communities, and that aids the anti-Blackness that we see today, you know, in our families. And it could be, we hear, right? And it's understandable as to why it's happening, right? It's all over our, the news, right? I'm gonna speak on the Latinx community particularly, right? People are watching news that aid that same anti-Blackness that we talk about, right? Where it's blaming, you know, the folks that are experiencing the most harm right now. And so people get this idea on their heads that like it's them, they're doing this harm, they're doing this destruction without looking at the systemic issues that are happening, right? And that's all happening. And it starts with having comments like that give you the idea and the opportunity to think in that way, and to think that that's okay, to think that, you know, when you think about a criminal, I'm gonna put quotes on criminal, right? When you think about that, you think about a specific person. And why is that? Why is that you think that, right? And it's because from early on, like you get taught to think that way, right? And we need to be really mindful when we talk about, you know, anti-Blackness and when we talk about like colorism, because they're like intertwined and they're like really connected, right? And it operates in different ways in all parts of the world, but it all relates, right? And I think as folks, non-Black folks, we need to recognize like what privileges we hold as non-Black people, right? And be, again, I think I go back to that because I think it all starts at home, and having those conversations with their families of like, you know, whenever you hear, you know, your aunts talking about that, right? Talking about that baby that could have been prettier, right? If that baby was lighter, say, no, that's actually not okay. Why would you think that? And challenge those ideas, because as we see them, we don't think about them as harmful, but they're aiding all of the systems that we see in place right now. So I would encourage folks to have those conversations in their families when they're sitting at the table, right? And they're talking about something, and anti-Blackness comes up as like regular conversations. Like it's part of our vocabulary sometimes, right? And we don't even think about it because it's part of it, because we have normalized it. So I would encourage everyone to challenge that and to take a step back and think about, okay, maybe I should like address that, you know, maybe I should say like and let me explain why, right? And I know that that's going to require for you to do some homework, and that's where the heavy work comes, because you do have to do the individualized like homework and the reflection to then be able to vocalize it to others, right? And so when you're at a Sunday party, right, and there's anti-Black comments that are coming up, say, hold up, wait, why are we talking about it like that? And I guarantee you, most likely your family's gonna be like, you taking it too seriously. Come on, like, you don't have to talk about it. Like, why do you make everything about politics? Why do you make everything about race? Like, it's for you to do the job and say, yeah, because it is. And because all of these actions, whether you want to think about it or not, are part of this bigger system that is killing people. Like those very harmful things that you think about, like we have to do that reflection, because at the end of the day, they are what is aiding this like hateful systems that are killing people. So those comments, I know that it's hard for you to like put them together, but they're a part of it, right? Having those conversations, having those comments, and normalizing those comments is part of the problem. Having those normalized comments that are anti-Black be part of your Sunday parties, right? Be part of like talking about a baby that could have been lighter. Those are the that's part of the problem. And we have to do that work to kind of like talk about it, dissect it, and be like, let's stop ourselves, right? And even though you're probably gonna get some pushback, you will get some pushback. You can be that person that plants a seed in people's heads, right? Whether they think, because you're never gonna change a person. People are gonna come to change on their own terms and under their own reflection. But you can be that person that plants the one seed that makes them think, well, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't say that comment about that baby. Like, why would I? Why would I? And have that reflection. So I know that I said a lot, but I hope that made sense.
Yeah,
We do it too, even in our community. The example when babies are born, I remember, I don't hear it as often these days, but I remember when I was in my 20s and like a lot of my friends were having babies. I won't say how old I am, but a long time ago, right? Like, but people would look at the baby and we would talk about, like, you could tell by the tips of their ears, the tips of the ears or the cuticles, the baby's cuticles, they were always a little bit darker. And the darker the baby, and I love my chocolate cousin who was just born recently. I'm glad I don't hear these things coming up anymore the way they used to. But if the tips of the ears and the cuticle area of their nails are really, really dark, someone would make these comments and say, oh, don't worry, they'll lighten up. We're like, what? Wait a minute, why? Why are we concerned about the color, this projected color of this baby being light, right? It's so subconscious even, right? Think about Asia, like the billboard signs for skin bleaching, right? So that people can stay as close to whiteness as possible. It's trippy to me. Sorry, Drina, go ahead, Chris.
If I can say, I think that thank you, Gabby, and Don, the colorism issue, which translates in this country to anti-Blackness in a lot of ways, is global. And it is global, related to aristocracy and related to capitalism. And if you look around the globe in various caste systems in ancient cultures, China, for example, I believe, India, for example, colonialism in the South America and Central America, all based on the caste, the colorism scale. And what does that, why? Because if you were from a moneyed class, if you were from a capitalist class, then you didn't work in the sun. You didn't work in the fields. You had privilege. And so the way you show your privilege is that you don't have a tan. You're not dark. And so you're not a worker. You are a ruler. You are of the aristocracy class. You are a capitalist. So I think in that sense, colorism is global and showed up in colonialism all around the world. Certainly here in the United States, it was here. But, in 1681, the word white in defining a people was put into law in response to Bacon's rebellion, which had happened a few years before. And thereafter, series of laws were put into place further defining white. And what it meant initially is that it was a way for the merchant class in the capitalist class to put down the rebellions of the people. How many times have we seen that in history, where whenever the people get together across their differences, then the rulers, the people who are have to figure out how to put it down. Well, in 1681, the way they put it down was to decide that anybody who was not of European descent or white had no way to become a citizen and was not considered of the same class. In this case, people of African descent were then permanently enslaved. And any of those folk who were indentured servants and who were white, once they had served their 7-year indenturitude, were then given a plot of land, a drum of gunpowder, and a gun, and told to go out and settle the lands. Now that's social welfare, the beginnings of social welfare. But Black folk were then permanently enslaved and then made to be the lower class, the people you did not want to be, even though what led to that was folks of African descent and folks of European descent getting together and rebelling together for their rights. So there's a long history and pattern of that in this country. So it's both, anti-Blackness is both global. They're uprising in Europe right now. I mean, in South Africa right now over the killing of a young man. Last name is Julius. I can't remember his first name right now. But it's global. Anti-Blackness is global, again, because it's associated with the working class. It's not associated with being in power, even though there's plenty of examples of Black folk being in power in their own countries, right? When they've managed to hold on to them or take them back from colonialism. But here in the United States, it takes on that particular flavor because it is clearly associated with the capitalist rise of this country. That means it's baked into the fabric. It's that first loop in the scarf that's being made. It cannot be separated from that, because to undo that means the whole thing falls apart. And that's a good thing, because now is our time to remake something by acknowledging how this began.
Thank you. That was yeah. I'm glad we had that conversation because, you know, we talk about anti-Blackness as a skin color, but anti-Blackness is a system, right? And there were some people that may argue that it wasn't just the fact that George Floyd was Black, it was anti-Blackness that actually killed George Floyd. The structures of policing and all of the, you know, all of the systems that are grounded in anti-Blackness, from economics to policing to our educational systems. So we have a lot of questions in the chat. I think I had a final question, but I think that we've talked about that in, we've talked about that in our conversations that we've had. So I want to pay attention to some of the questions that we have in our chat. So again, thank you all for being so patient with your questions. Thank you for being actively involved in the conversation. So I have a student that says, as a white student getting a master's program that focuses on institutionalized racism and anti-racist behavior in education, how can I best show up for my cohort mates of color without taking space and filling space with my white-centered experiences?
Yeah, were you gonna speak, Don or Adrena?
Go ahead.
I was going to say something, but you go ahead, Gabby.
Well, you know, as a recently student that went through a graduate program that was mostly white, my department was mostly white. I always hope that people had those questions, that students ask themselves those questions. I'm really glad to hear that, right? Because I think that's the first step, you doing that reflection and saying, how can I show up, right? And acknowledging that, you know, it's okay to not take space, right? And to allow for folks to take in that space. Because I didn't have that in my department necessarily, or through my graduate experience. I always felt like I was educating the professor. I always felt like I was educating my classmates. It felt really uncomfortable, and the burden was always on me. And it was never explicit, like, you have to explain it, Gabby, right? But it was like no one else around me was being critical and like thinking about, you know, different things. And so I really hope that other people, in not just in graduate programs, but in their schooling, that they think about this and that they have some reflection that is going on, just like, you know, based on that question. And that they think, you know, this is the moment to not take space. And like, as much as you want to speak and you're eager to speak, like, hold yourself and be like, I'm going to allow for like other folks to possibly, you know, chime in, and I can take a step back. And that's already acknowledging your privilege. And that's already acknowledging, like, I already come into this space with a lot of privilege, and I'm going to hold back, right? And it's also about not expecting people to educate you, right? And to actually do that work yourself. And for professors to be critical and to think, I'm not going to put this one student on the spot. Like, I'm also going to do that reflection, and I'm going to put that critical lens not only in all of my classes and what I have people read, right? Because that's also how it matters, how you write your syllabus, how you run your classes, you know, like really being mindful about that. And also thinking about, like, how can I build an environment where, you know, students of color feel comfortable enough with asking questions and taking space, right? Because we also deserve to take space sometimes. And how can I be critical, and how can I be conscious and delicate, and also letting, you know, my white students know that it's okay to take a step back, right? And maybe not a step back, step to the side. That's another thing, right? So not necessarily back, but to the side, and let others people, you know, talk about their experience, and not in a way that feels like you're exploiting their stories, right? But that it feels like there's a productive conversation being had. And I think it takes a lot of work. And I think every time that I talk about this and think about it, it requires a lot of work from the students, from the professor, from the institution, from the department, to really be conscious and critical about the way you show up, and the way that you have a lot of power when you're in this classroom. So use it to make it safe for people, and also make it okay for other students to step aside, right? And to know that it's okay to hand the mic. You don't need to talk about an experience. You don't need to talk for other people. And I think that's what happens a lot in graduate programs, where you have the mic, right? And you have the ability to speak on a certain topic. And then you talk about it as if it was you, without having the respect of, like, why are you doing this work? And how can you give actually that mic to that population that you're writing about, right? How can you do that? How can you, instead of being about you, like, how can you make it so that those folks that you're working your project on are actually having a voice? Because no one's voiceless, right? Like, we all have the opportunity to speak up, and to, like, have our voices be heard. So I think it's going to have to be a lot of work, and there's going to have to be a lot of mindfulness that goes into this from a lot of different ends, from the students, from the professors, from the institutions, from the department, to actually make it happen. Because one teacher can do it, right? One student can try to do it, but we need a whole lot of people to actually get it done. So I'm grateful that she's having this, or that they're having this, this questions that they're asking themselves. And what is their role? Because I think that's key, right? And maybe I don't have the specific answer for your question, but I think them asking that reflection, those reflective questions as to, like, why, you know, what is my place? That is it. That's the questions that we need people to be asking themselves. What is my role in this? What is actually going to be productive out of this? And you know, also making sure that you're not speaking for other people, but they're actually creating a platform so that those people get to actually speak on their own and have that voice.
Thank you, Gabby. So well said. That's dead on. I won't repeat what you said. I will add that the California Faculty Association was just highly instrumental in the passage of Assembly Bill 1460, which requires that there be 3 units of ethnic studies courses that folks would take that before graduating from a CSU campus. That's just a tiny step. I think something real key about what Gabby said is the very idea of ethnic studies, critical race theory, anti-Blackness, anti-immigrants, xenophobia, all of those things should be weaved into all of our courses. It should be a part of the what's happening in the classroom, because all of those things are systemic. They all have an effect on our institutions, and thereby they have an effect on all of us. And so I think, folk have to do the hard work of, as Gabby said, weaving it into the very fabric of what they're teaching, and weaving it into the very fabric of our institutions. And then we're not pulling these things out as if they're something separate and distinct, because we are matrixed, we are intersectional, and we are developing understanding. But on the journey there, it is, individuals have to do the work of speaking in I terms, speaking about themselves. It's like when you see an act, when you have a consciousness or a mindfulness, and you see something happen, you interrupt that by saying, I saw what you did. I am uncomfortable by what happened. I am asking you to not do that again. I am going to put my body between you and this individual, you and this institution, between you and this messed upness that you are engaged in. Is that a word? This messed upness that you are engaged in. And the same thing happens in the classroom. So I think the person who asked that question, kudos to you for having mindfulness. Kudos to you for having an awareness that that is something that you might want to work on. And that's the place we ask everybody to start from. Start from that place. Keep doing the work of learning and understanding. And when you don't know or understand, ask a question with some humility, not with the tone of attack, because you ask the question with the tone of attack, that's how you're going to get the response. And so, we start by doing our own individual work and understanding how we fit into the pie. And again, I want to reiterate this point. AB 1460 is now law for the Cal State universities. Folks should be thinking about what ethnic studies class you're going to teach. Faculty on campus, administrators on campus should be thinking about how does the core of ethnic studies, how does the core of critical race theory fit into your coursework? Because remember, it's baked in. So everything we teach has anti-Blackness. Everything we teach has a core of capitalism in it, quite frankly. There's an article, and I wish I could remember, maybe I'll share with you all later. There was an article in the Chronicle of Education called How We Learned History. And if you read that and you realize how all the way, things that we've been taught have had a racist core in them, because it was necessary to define Black folk in particular in a certain way for the sake of capitalism. It's necessary to define our Chinese brothers and sisters in a certain way for the sake of capitalism. In the history of Los Angeles, it was necessary to define hobos, which I learned when I read Lido Hernandez's book, The City of Inmates, because they didn't fit the picture of what was necessary. So, I think, again, the general summation that I'm taking away from this conversation is that we all got work to do. Because if you can't see it, you don't understand it, then you can't fix it.
I just would like to add just a little bit on that point. I think that there's a lot of power in listening and understanding. And I think that what you're doing in the program, and, I'll be looking into that program myself and seeing if I go into a master's in SCAE, and really understanding, right, the stories and personal lived experiences of people in your cohort, and how that will play a role in your future, right? Not just your future, but the people who you're going to engage in whatever, role in the educational system you engage in, because the impact that you will have is going to go a long way if you really pay attention to the lived experiences that people in your class and your cohort have shared with you. There's a lot of vulnerability with sharing and understanding. And I think that the biggest piece for organizing, in particular for myself, is in the listening and really understanding where people are coming from. How much pain are they carrying? How much trauma are they carrying, right? But not taking it upon yourself to solve the issue that they're facing, but how can you work with them? How can you, the main goal of our organization at Libre is to empower residents to fight back. So how can you work with somebody who's going through a situation and empower them together? Not you guiding them or holding their hand or telling them, hey, go do this and this will solve your issue. No, no, no. Walk with them. This is a journey, like we've been saying. So just take it easy. Don't hurt yourself, right? Like this is a process. And listening is very vital in this process. And in organizing, when we do a one-on-one conversation, right, it's 70 to 30, right? 70% you're listening, 30% you talk. In some cases, it might be even a 20-80. Just alone yesterday, I had an hour-long conversation with someone who's going through a very difficult time. And honestly, all they wanted was someone to just listen to them. And it wasn't even tell me what to do. No, 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 just listen to me. And so I feel like sometimes in the experiences in the class, some people are just wanting to be heard. They just want to share what they're going through. And I think that in the classroom setting, the faculty member has a lot of responsibility on how they set up the classroom and if they make it comfortable enough for people to share. And I believe in the master's program, that's where a lot of the unlearning has to happen. I wish that we could say the same thing in the BA section, but or in the undergrad experience, but I don't think it can happen. I feel like there's a lot of more comfortability when it comes down to the master program. I wish it could be different. I understand that there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen and a lot of institutional changes in order for us to get there. But I feel like the responsibility falls on the academic setting. And I know that there's some faculty members that I had in the sociology department that played a huge role, but it wasn't until I took my Chicano Latino study courses that I really started looking at things differently. And if you want to read a good book, it's by Paulo Freire. It's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? It definitely teaches you, right, that even if you are a person of color, you can still oppress other people. You can still be the oppressor. And so that's just a recommendation there and definitely plays a huge role in the way that I see things and the way that I organize and do what I do.
Can I add another point to that? And that is because I see that there's a question in the Q&A asking about Black folk to Black folk. I mentioned in my earlier comment that we are all steeped in the way history is taught here in this country. And so, and we are taught that history from a white European colonial perspective. And so that's why the need for ethnic studies. And not everybody has had the luxury of taking ethnic studies courses, but we know plenty of studies have been done that prove that people who have taken ethnic studies are completely empowered. Give you an example. Arizona a few years back when they were trying to destroy Mexican American studies in Arizona, I mean, the Republican politicians, and I'm going to mention party because it was Republicans and they made it a party issue, said that they didn't want people to feel empowered because the people who took Mexican American studies then started to demand, then started to get active, then started to run for office. So the dynamics of power were being challenged because those folks, as A. Philip Randolph says, and I'm going to read the quote directly from over here, says, if you are comfortable with my oppression, then you are my oppressor. So those folks were comfortable being the oppressor of folk. And so, and the same thing happens. Melina Abdullah, who's the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles chapter, talks all the time about what ethnic studies meant for her and how it empowered her to love herself. I grew up on the South Side of Chicago. I feel like I was steeped in that sort of thing. My entire education experience, I have a very strong sense of myself and pride of myself, but not only just not a simple pride, but an understanding of my people's contribution to this country, my people's contribution to the globe. And so I think I think, but not everybody had that same experience. And so if you're not taught, or your parents weren't taught the value of themselves in any situation, and or if you live in a highly oppressive cultural environment, which America is for a lot of folk, then of course you're going to identify with the power structure. That is normal. That is the structure. But we need people to understand themselves. And that's why I think the call for ethnic studies education in CSU, and the call and the need to protect our social sciences, our history classes, is very vital to folks learning and understanding. And we can't make the mistake that just because you are a person of color that you understand if you've received an education that has not explained yourself to yourself.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in this last piece here on this point that I think I'm hearing, because again, I'm all up in the chat still. I love being with people, and we can't, be with people as much nowadays. There was like 400 people in here. I would have rather been in a room with 400 people to do all this good listening and exploring with you all. So I'm doing it in the chat. So again, I'm appreciating the comments and questions. And so, yeah, thank you, Beto. Like, in organizing, listening, I never, so it's 70-30 now, because I've always understood it as 80-20, right? We're doing 80% of listening and 20% of talking, and really the talking around two things. The one around people's experiences and what's important to them, and then two, an education towards some, request of engagement around whatever it is that we're trying to organize with them around. But, it's so key. It just seems very human and natural and like an organic and like a no-brainer to me to think about understanding how to be a co-conspirator, or, even just to be an ally, if that's what is in a person's capacity. Lots of questions in here about how to engage more systemically, or how do we not cross the line with allyship or co-conspiratorship? How do I be an ally without, so I get those questions, and it really is about where are you? And this has been covered. I'm probably repeating a little bit again because I was in the question box, but where are you personally in your own life experiences? We're all moving from a place of our own individual life experiences. And so being able to assess and evaluate your own, assess and evaluate your proximity to where you know of or where you're hearing of, because you may not realize it just being in your own privilege. Your life experiences may not have consisted of anything discriminatory. Maybe you've been steeped in privilege where you literally don't see harm by police, right? In your neighborhood, your neighbor is the cop and you're friends with their kids, and that's your experience with police, right? In other people's neighborhoods, police pick up gang members, drop them off in other gang members' neighborhoods to get beat up. Those are those people's experiences with police. And so if we don't, just take time to be with each other sometime and ask questions and engage, we might not know that. But I'll, excuse me, I have these other thoughts, but I'm going to share. I feel really close to Chicano community, some Latinx community. I often just say brown sisters and brothers, right? Because I feel like I've been around a mix of identities of my brown sisters and brothers, and some old school, new school. And I worked with a union that was predominantly brown, Latino. And it was the Justice for Janitors Union back in the day, SCIU Local 1877, which is now USWW. They're now a mixed union of what was known then, I don't know how they identify now, but then it was the Janitors Union. And, they're mixed with the security union, the security workers union now. And when I was there, I was one of just a few Black organizers, and maybe 2 or 3. And everyone else was brown, except for the management at the top, of course, was white. And I had very few previous experiences Well, no, I grew up with a lot of experiences with systemic racism and anti-Blackness. Systemic meaning like when my mom had to be on welfare for a short time, social workers would come to make sure there was no man living in the house in order to continue to receive welfare at that time. Or systemic violence where, you know, during the war on drugs, during the crack epidemic, people were losing their minds on this drug that got infused into Black communities, and folks stealing VCRs for a hit or selling their car or children for a hit type stuff going on, you know, and selling it to each other because of lack of resources and jobs or programs, et cetera. You know, there was no one saying, let's build rehabilitation centers to help folks out of the situation. It was just being infused. And so watching like the batter ram, I don't know how many people on this call remember a batter ram and what that is, but would bulldoze people's homes to catch them for selling crack, right? So I knew what systemic, these are policing systems, criminalization system, right? That war on drugs we know led to mass incarceration. So I was familiar with that. Direct racial discrimination, I kind of grew up in Compton and then here in Long Beach since I was 7 years old and have been fortunate and had some privilege to be all over the country. I didn't experience it directly until I was about 21 or so in the South when I went to on this apprenticeship to do some organizing work and witnessed these older, I'm gonna say older, white, gray-haired men who were directly discriminating against the workers there. And there was like 6,000 workers on this shipyard on the West Bank of New Orleans. And they made the most derogatory comments about these workers when we went to go house visit with them one day, made comments towards me and a couple of the other apprentices, Black apprentices. That was the first time I had experienced some real racism. But so back at SEIU Local 1877, working with Janet, as you know, we're learning that we have to listen. And I just learned that our experiences are not that far off. And not that far off, but in that learning, there were these struggles that arose between security workers that were trying to organize and janitors who were trying to organize. And the employers, capitalists, the building owners where the security workers secured the buildings, right? If you go into a commercial building, any downtown city, you know, the sky rises, those security workers, they were organizing a union. You have the janitors who are cleaning those buildings, right? You have the building owners, you have the property management companies, you have the security company owners, you have the janitorial company owners. Those are, many of them, the capitalists, right? They're the ones that are seeking to just sustain and control their economic flows using these workforces to do so. And while these workers were organizing, these employers were attempting to pit the Black workers against the brown workers. And it was only through just having these conversations like Gabby and I had, you know, recently with a group of folks about sharing, and Audrina was there, around just sharing stories about our experiences and listening to those stories, hearing the commonalities, hearing that a lot of people's mindsets are based on just, you know, judgments based on perception and like these false ideals that are sometimes subconscious. But if we're not taking the time to have that listening, we'll miss it and allow for, you know, for people or institutions or systems to exploit our relationships. And it was through that listening that has enabled me to be able to be that bridge maker, to be that kind of alliance builder. It just, you know, it opens up so many other avenues and possibilities and allows you to explore, you know, what kind of ally or co-conspirator you can be. So just checking your own privilege, interests. I was answering this to one of the questions in here. Your interest, proximity to wherever you're aware of these anti-Black or discriminatory practices happening, evaluating your own capacity. Don't force yourself. If it's not there for you, if what's there for you is just to be an ally and you want to post things on your social media and write some letters, and that's what you're willing to do, then do that, right? Yeah, and if you're ready to take that next step, then you know, you'll feel that will move you, and engage with those around you to figure out how to do that. But it just, without doing that, you know, I think we'll remain in this, I don't know, we'll remain stuck. And so I feel like I'm about to like repeat things that you all have already said at this point, but continue to just explore where you are and where you want to be and what your own capacity is, and move.
I wanted to add something because I think you brought up so many good points, Dawn, and I think the Black and Brown unity, like, it's important now more than ever. Like, I think it's always been, but I think this is the moment to really come together. And I think as we talk about allyship and co-conspirators, if you're a Latinx person and you're saying Brown Lives Matter, you're not an ally. That's not even starting to be an ally. And I think we need to call that in and bring it into the conversation. Because I've heard a lot of people say like, why are we saying Black Lives Matter? We should be saying all lives matter, or Brown Lives Matter too. And I think that's missing the very intention of what it means, right? If Black Lives Matter, if Black lives don't matter, will never matter. Like, Latinx lives will never matter. And so I think we need to think about that. And when we say that, it's actually harming and doing a disservice to the movement when you talk about, but you know, Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, and we shouldn't say Black Lives Matter, right? That is also part of the problem. So I know that there's a lot of students watching here. I know there's a lot of Latinx students in this institution at Cal State Long Beach. So I think it's for us to reflect, right? And to think about that, and to really be in awareness that if you're saying Brown Lives Matter, you're not even an ally at that point, right? I think there's a lot that needs to be kind of reflected on, if that's what you're using, right? Because I think we need to think about, like, what is the movement really doing, and why is it that we're saying Black Lives Matter? And if you really don't believe that, don't say Brown Lives Matter, because that's defeating the purpose of the very movement that we're trying to kind of unite. And I think this is a moment to come together, because our struggles intertwine more than we even think about. They're more connected. We're more like, we should be in solidarity, because the same systems that are keeping Black families separated by the prison system is the same system that is keeping immigrant families in detention, that are prisons as well. So I think we can't differentiate the two. It's exactly the same system that continues to separate Brown and Black families in this country. So I think it's important to be said, because I've seen a lot of people that I love that are using that language, that are saying those things. So I think it's important for us to realize that those same systems are keeping our families separated as well, and that they continue to be in detention, in prisons, right? And that's both for Black and Brown families.
I want to be mindful of the time. It is 11:53 and this panel goes on to 12 o'clock. I want to end with one last question. What, if you have any resources, this is to the panelists, can you put them in the chat so we can share them with the audience? Because there are a lot of questions about how can they be involved, how can they get involved, and what information do they have, or can you provide to help them be co-conspirators? But how do we keep the momentum going? How do we stay in action moving forward? So if you could speak to that, and as one final note for each of you.
I think I want to say, I want to encourage folks to, as I said earlier, when the sensationalism goes away, like when the news is talking about something else, when the next social media challenge comes up, it's something fun, and then that's all that we're talking about. I want to ask folks to remember that Black lives are on the line every day. That's historic in America. Don't forget that. Stay on top of that. And the way you can do that is not rely on TV news or social media necessarily to be your source of information. I think everybody should join organizations that resonate with you, and join organizations that are connected with other organizations and working in coalition with each other, even if that coalition is operational unity for that moment. But I think that's what folks need to do. You need to find organizations and get your information from those trusted sources, and then stay engaged, right? You know, after Trayvon Martin was murdered and after Mike Brown's murder also, there was a lot of energy. We hit the streets. That's when Black Lives Matter was, you know, the hashtag became a household term for everybody. It also has became a truism, which we see today, and it became an organization. But people faded a little bit in places. People faded, but we kept doing the work. We're going to keep doing the work because the issues are still happening. Black folks are still being murdered by police brutality. Black folks still, unfortunately, meet the lowest barometer on everything, you know, economics, education, home ownership, business ownership, et cetera, et cetera. And none of that means that we are degenerate or that there's something inherently wrong with us. It means that this system that we live in is working for us exactly like it was meant to from 1619 forward, which is to oppress and suppress our progress. And yet we still rise, as Maya Angelou said, we still rise, but it's not without difficulty. We are America's moral voice. We step up and we get in, and we ask others to step up and do that with us in the ways that you can.
Moving forward. Thank you, Audrina. Yeah, so I'm so in the chat this whole time. Folks are like, oh, how do I, you know, make sure that when I give to the right organization? Sorry if I don't recall your name, who wrote that question, but what I'm about to say gets at your question also. It's like, just do a little bit of homework. You know, you can go, I am going to drop it in our chat, or one of our tech folks can actually go ahead and drop what I put in the chat to our whole audience. I would invite people to check out go to our global Black Lives Matter network website, and down towards the bottom, some places, a list of the chapters who are actually part of the Black Lives Matter network. You can find your local chapter in your state. I know there are a lot of people on here, so you can find a chapter in your state on that website. If you're local, you know, feel free to check in with BLMLBC on IG, our Facebook page, same with BLMLA.org, BLMLB.org. Those are LA and Long Beach's websites. You can stay up to breast with our organization's upcoming actions, ways to give if that's what your thing is, ways to get involved. I also invite people, our non-Black friends, to connect with White People for Black Lives. If one of our tech folks can just pull up their website, I know time's winding down, so I might not be able to do that in time. White People for Black Lives, and also SURGE, Showing Up for Racial Justice. So we have an amazing group of white co-conspirators, not just allies, who are doing some amazing work with us here in Long Beach as well. So, and you know, have those difficult conversations at home in your families. Create circles just like this around whatever the topics are that you're having questions about, or you're struggling through. How can I do this? Or which system do I care most about? Or what about the hard conversations with my Black friends who I see the problem? How come my Black friend doesn't? Type conversations. Just open them up, as awkward, as uncomfortable as they may be, have them. And yeah, and you know, be aware of your privilege where you are, and do that work right where you are. It's not a far reach to challenge any injustice that you see right in front of you. Be bold, be courageous. We appreciate you guys listening today, and thank you for, you know, rolling out now and forward, and all the work that we're doing for racial justice and for Black lives.
Yeah, I think I would say, yeah, I think do that reflection, you know, and organize your families. So I know that there's family members within your family that you can tap into to have those tough conversations with your families, right? Because they are going to be uncomfortable, and they're not going to be a one-time conversation. I'll guarantee you that. It's not going to be a one-time conversation. It's going to be an ongoing conversation. I think this is going to be an ongoing process in our families, in the city, right? Yesterday, there was a decision that was made within the city budget where, you know, police is still being invested in and communities are not. So this just tells us that this is going to be a long battle, and it's going to be very, very much ongoing. So I invite you all to do that self-reflection and to, like Don was saying, like looking inward and see where you are at and how you want to show up. You know, I invite you all to follow us on social media. Our handle is at LBIRC562, and that's how it is for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So yeah, I think I would want you all to like really just have that reflection and have those conversations with your families and stay engaged, because there's a lot to come.
And then just before I check off, thank you so much everybody for, checking in and joining us today. Also the ASL interpreters, y'all are fire. And I'm always happy to share space with Don and Audrina and now Amber as well. And honestly, like this movement, has taught me a lot about life and who I am as a person. And, it does come with hard conversations and being vulnerable, being open about yourself. Really unlearning a lot of what you grew up with is, I think, the biggest thing about all this work. We also have to look at it from the external point of view, right? Of how the media portrays and how the media influences the way that we think and that we see things. And so, by reading, yeah, you can unlock a lot of portals and a lot of unlearning can happen there. But more than anything, engage in conversation and come from it from a place of love. Don't come from it as a place of, I'm going to teach you something, because that's not how we do things. Like, at the end of the day, like, we're in this together. And if we're really going to change things, it comes from, from the heart and, guiding from there. And so just before we check out as well, it's, our handle on Instagram is at WeAreLBRE. And then I posted something on the chat. Right now we're currently helping a houseless single Black mother with her 3 kids. And we're just trying to help her get, into a place. Right now we're just trying to get her for outside of from the hotel that she's staying in, because if she loses that hotel, she loses her kids. That's why it's so vital that, we play this role in supporting her. And that's what we've been doing, hour-long conversation. One thing she said is, I feel like the city turned their back on me. I'm a Long Beach resident and they've turned their back on me. But people like Don has stepped in as well and is supporting her as well. I'm helping her out in the best way that I can. And right now, financially is the best way that we can support her and ensuring that she has a roof over her head temporarily while she figures things out and as we help her through it all. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Really appreciated this, and thank you so much for organizing this. And I am a CFA intern, graduate as well. So shout out to CFA, the California Faculty Association, and for supporting students, right, and Students for Quality Education, which is a student group. And honestly, I think that that program definitely played a big role in the way that I organized today.
I just want to say thank you again for taking time out your day. All of you, Don, Gabby, Bakethel, and Gabby. I mean, it's a Don. Oh my gosh. Don, Audrina, Gabby, Bakethel. I really enjoyed serving as your moderator today to California State University, Long Beach. Thank you for this, but I hope you continue to support these activities both publicly and financially. And with that, I will bring this panel to a close. Thank you. And one more thing that I want to say is we didn't get a chance to answer all of your questions. There is an opportunity. Everyone has given their links to their organization, and I hope that the panelists are open for further questions if individuals have them. Would you be open to that?
Sure.
Yes. So if you could, the links have been provided for you in the chat. If you have further questions and you don't think that we answered them, feel free to reach out to them. Feel free to reach out to me as well, Amber.Johnson at CSULB.edu. So with that, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Cindy. Great job.